Thank you for joining today's webinar, Virtual Fencing for Sheep. My name's Jodie Rosé-O'Brien and I'm one of the AWI Extension South Australia team. Tonight's webinar is being co-hosted by Naomi Scholes from Ag Innovation and Research, Eyre Peninsula, better known as Eyre. For those not familiar with Eyre, they're a professional farmer-owned and directed organisation that drives the advancement and practical application of agricultural scientific research, development and extension in dryland farming systems relevant to the Eyre Peninsula and like environments across Australia. Today's webinar is supported by Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund, Department of Primary Industries and Regions, and Ag Innovation and Research Eyre Peninsula. Today's webinar is hosted by Australian Wool Innovations Extension South Australia. For more information, you can go to our website and follow us on socials. I'll introduce our speaker for this evening, which is Megan Willis. Megan is an early career researcher currently working in the Animal Innovation and Welfare team at the South Australian Research and Development Institute, also known as SARDI. She is a PhD candidate at the University of Adelaide, working on a project assessing the welfare impacts of virtual fencing when applied in sheep and cattle. In addition to her PhD project, Megan is undertaking research into the role of virtual fencing technology in a range of livestock production systems across South Australia, with a particular focus on agricultural productivity and environmental sustainability. Megan's research interests are driven by a passion to contribute to productive and profitable livestock production systems without compromising environmental sustainability and best practice animal welfare. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, Jodie. Thanks everyone for joining today. I just wanted to start off the webinar with a poll to gauge the level of knowledge on virtual fencing and sheep that the audience has in a South Australian context. So
thanks everyone for responding to our poll. So I would have said that most people in the audience tonight, about 45%, feel fairly well informed, but we also have a quite large percentage there that are not very well informed or not at all informed. Thanks, Megan.
Great. So hopefully I'll be able to teach you guys something, or you'll be able to walk away with something from this webinar. So I just want to start off by saying that this webinar is supported by Eyre, the SA Drought Hub and AWI Extension SA. And this project within SARDI is funded by the SA Drought Hub, the South Australian Government and SARDI with contributions from the University of Adelaide. So I want to start off and just give you guys a bit of an indication of what virtual fencing is and how it works. So virtual fencing is a ag tech device. It's basically a invisible fence that farmers can use to impose boundaries on their farm that are GPS enabled. So each animal will wear a collar that is in contact with GPS and also in contact with a base station or cellular network that then feeds data back and forth to an online platform. So the farmer can draw boundaries on the platform, monitor where animals are, and keep an eye on what's going on and the connectivity and the GPS work together to ensure that everything's working on the ground. Virtual fencing works using audio and pulse signals that are applied through the collars. So this is underpinned by a learning theory called associative learning, which is basically the ability for animals to learn the association between different cues in their environment. So within a virtual fencing context, that is learning the association between the audio cue, their behavioural response to that cue, and then the outcome, which is the pulse. So you can see here on this slide a diagram showing some sheep in a paddock with a virtual fence imposed down the middle there. So the sheep there with the little sound emoji that is approaching the virtual fence, and its collar has said, beep, you're approaching the fence. Now's the time to make a change in your behaviour. So that sheep can then choose to stop, back away, turn around, anything other than move towards the virtual fence, and then its collar will not give it any further signals. But if the sheep decides to move towards the virtual fence, it will receive a pulse from its collar. And over time, the sheep learn that if they stop after hearing the beep, they will not receive the pulse. So that gives the animal some control over whether or not they receive that pulse at the end, if they keep going or if they stop. And that is the way that animals are contained with the technology. There are a few commercial products available in Australia for cattle. These are the Gallagher e-Shepherd device, which is the orange one down there in the photo, the Vents device, which is the grey one there in the middle, and the Halter device, which is the one on those Angus cattle on the end there. These are all commercially active in Australia in states that allow virtual fencing, but there are no commercial devices for sheep in Australia at the moment. You can see there right on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a small little sheep device and a larger cattle device. Those are manufactured by a company called No Fence in Norway, and they're used throughout the UK. But in terms of sheep, they're not, my understanding is they're not overly suitable for Australian conditions, so they don't have a commercial presence in Australia at the moment. We also have some welfare, animal welfare legislation constraints throughout the country. So within Queensland, Western Australia and Tasmania, virtual fencing can be used for cattle. Some states have particular conditions on that use. All the other states, it's completely prohibited. So as you can see there in South Australia, it's prohibited for sheep and cattle. And yeah, across Australia, there's no virtual fencing commercially for sheep at the moment. The reason for this is because cattle virtual fencing is very well established. It's in the early stages of commercialisation. It's really popular in, for example, in Tasmania, where it's widely used in the dairy industry, but sheep is far less developed. So not having a device and having less demonstration and research around commercial applications as well. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background on some of the research that's gone into virtual fencing for sheep. So it all started at CSIRO in Armidale, where they were using manually remote controlled collars similar to collars that are used for hunting and working dogs to impose the boundaries. So they would use a beep and a pulse through those collars. And they were able to run some trials to prove that sheep could learn the association between those cues, just like cattle could, that they could be contained within an area using those cues, and also that there were minimal animal welfare impacts resulting from an electric pulse being applied. From there, the CSIRO group ran a trial in South Australia where they contained 10 ultra-white sheep for 5 days using a collar that they had modified into a halter. So that is the old version of the e-Shepherd device there. So that was the first trial in Australia that demonstrated that sheep could be contained by an automated virtual fencing system. From there, we started doing some research at SARDI as part of our current project. And part of that was assessing virtual fencing for sheep. So we picked up where CSIRO left off, and we thought, okay, how can we assess the impact of wool on virtual fencing and how much that gets in the way? And also, will an automated system work in larger groups of sheep and for a longer period of time? So what we did was had groups of 19 crossbred ewes in a replicated trial. You can see this paddock outline here with the GPS heat map. We had some sheep that were clipped. They had the wool on their neck clipped, and some sheep that were left in about 6 months wool. And what we were able to do there is show that the virtual fencing really successfully contained the clipped sheep, and to an extent the woolly sheep. You can see on the far right there was one sheep that decided it didn't want to obey, and I think that was actually a faulty collar. But yeah, compared to that control down the bottom, which is an electric fence, we had really, really good containment. In saying that though, the sheep with wool, when we analysed the data, we found that they had much higher levels of audio and pulse signal applied, which kind of gives us an indication that the system wasn't as effective with woolly sheep, and they had to receive more signals, which kind of gives us an idea about how well they're learning the system. So we suspect that the wool was getting in the way of the sheep being able to learn the system really effectively, which can result in an animal welfare impact. So we recommended from that study that collars may not be the best solution for sheep with wool. From there, we thought, okay, how can we try and apply this in a commercial scenario in sheep? So we went across to the Minnipa Ag Centre on the Eyre Peninsula, and we set up a trial excluding 50 merino ewes from a sandhill within a stubble paddock. So you can see on the right there, the map shows an orange exclusion zone. So that's where we were trying to keep the sheep out of, again, using the same collars, which were a modified cattle device. You can see here, this is another GPS heat map. We obtained really, really good results from this trial. So we were able to exclude the sheep successfully from that area of the paddock for about 3 weeks, which was a really, really good result. You can see a fair bit of pressure on either side of that round semicircle boundary there, that the sheep were wanting to get up there and camp, but the virtual fencing successfully stopped them from getting up there. So that was a really promising result. From there, we've got one more sheep trial that we're hoping to run as part of this project, and that will be up on a sheep station north of Port Augusta. And there we're hoping to contain 100 Dorper ewes with the virtual fencing within 5 kilometre radius of a water trough. And we're also going to look into how the technology can be used to condense the sheep into a smaller area prior to mustering to increase mustering efficiency. So even after this project, when we've finished our few sheep trials, there are going to be some remaining research gaps that need to be addressed. Those include the proportion of a mob that needs to wear a device. So there's potential for less than 100% of a sheep mob to be collared, and then the technology could still be effective. We need to look into if virtual fencing can be used with lambs at foot, if that's effective, or if it has any animal welfare impacts. Also, if rotational grazing is feasible for sheep, particularly really intensive rotational grazing. And then obviously assessment of some long-term use over production seasons, including looking into animal welfare and practical considerations that come along with implementing that tech. Hopefully over the next 10 years, we'll see this technology continue to develop. The first step is development of a suitable device for sheep, whether that be an ear tag or something that isn't obstructed by wool, and then tweaks to the current algorithms to make them more suitable to sheep. We need some more welfare studies on long-term impacts, long-term assessments of the practical considerations, obviously a change in the regulations to be able to use the technology, and then early commercialisation and ongoing development through that time. And then hopefully we get some integration with other technology and platforms to kind of bring it together as a farm management tool. So now we're going to go into some breakout sessions, and within your groups, we want to brainstorm a couple of ideas. So the first is in response to the question, how would you, or if you're not a farmer, your clients, or just pretend you're a farmer for this session, how would you use virtual fencing on your farm? How do you see it being applied in the industry? And what capabilities or features would the technology need to have for you to adopt it?
Thanks everyone for joining the breakout rooms. There was certainly some great discussion. So just to summarise how the ideas that came from that about how you would use virtual fencing on your farm, there was a lot of responses around that increased control of grazing, so particularly about fencing off dams and waterways, excluding areas such as sandhills, management of internal roads, so not actually requiring fencing along roads in a physical sense, and also protecting sensitive areas such as regeneration or native vegetation areas. There was some discussion in a couple of groups around mustering, so to aid in mustering, and also to muster sheep out of scrub or other areas. Also the use of virtual fencing for improved utilisation of pastures and stubbles. It would also potentially replace the need for electric fencing when grazing, such as strip or rotational grazing. And we also thought in some groups that it would be important, or you could use it for monitoring of animals, so their sheep movements, their actual locations, and how they're utilising the landscape with their grazing. And lastly, I think the one there is about grazing in small areas. So using virtual fencing to graze those areas which would be normally too expensive to fence out. So that was the responses to the first question. The second question, what capabilities and features would the technology need to have for you to adopt it? We've got quite a good list here of different capabilities and features. So affordable and cheap came up in most groups, low maintenance, a hardy and reliable product that you could use. Importantly, for some growers, is that it works on sheep with wool, which Megan covered before. The compatibility with other species, particularly if you run alpacas with your sheep, that they have good welfare outcomes. It's idiot-proof or simple to use. Importantly, it's reusable across lifetimes of animals. A bit like the hardy and reliable, it's robust and long-lasting and suitable to the environment, particularly in pastoral or vast areas. There's good retention of the device, has low failure rate, and the other one was compatible with other farming systems such as farm software. The small percentages of the mob needing the device, and the device is small. You can actually plan your grazing in advance, and the battery life is good and doesn't need to be recharged or change batteries on a pretty regular basis, so it has good battery life. There's no unnecessary risks associated with the use. Importantly, that collars don't get tangled with fences or branches, and that collars are easily removed or don't require removal for operations such as shearing or other things. There's also, that comes with it, compatible with other systems, of the ability to incorporate other features and data collection, such as the movement, maybe monitoring animal health issues or mapping grazing patterns. They have few technical issues, and the connectivity requirements, particularly with pastoral systems, having a satellite rather than base station option, or in areas where there's no 4G. That the device is suitable for extensive systems, particularly in the pastoral zone, where you don't have to regularly muster for collar maintenance. And the other one was a suggestion that is there other technology options rather than collars, such as ear tags. So thanks everyone for your ideas. A great list there for you, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. I had prepared a list earlier, which pretty well aligns with what the groups had come up with. So yeah, mostly around exclusion from environmentally sensitive areas, being able to rotationally graze without electric fencing, and facilitating more intensive management within extensive pastoral systems as well. Also grazing areas within crops that maybe have been frost affected or are really weedy without compromising the rest of the crop. GPS tracking of animals as well is really important for a lot of people. Health and behaviour monitoring and alerts built into that as well, aiding with mustering as we spoke about, and potentially the incorporation of some pasture intake measures and sensors for different things as well. So within the main group here now, we'll do a bit of a brainstorming session around what do you think are the main barriers to adoption of virtual fencing in sheep. So we'll just get everyone to pop in the chat perhaps what they think the main barriers to adoption of virtual fencing in sheep are at the moment.
Thanks, Megan. So, yep, some pop them in the chat. The first one to come through is cost. So, yep, that was one we discussed in that breakout rooms, that was quite important. Another one coming through is about how long it's going to take to train the sheep. Megan, have you got a couple others there that have come through to you?
Yeah. So the first one obviously is the legislation. So yes, that's the biggest barrier at the moment. Also I had scale of the operation as well come through. So yeah, people that are running 10,000 sheep, it might not be totally feasible.
Yep. Another one that's come through, yep, animal welfare and the public perception of using virtual fencing. And that the collars, as we discussed earlier, that are reusable. Any others for you, Megan?
Yeah, also coming through here, the additional management requirements. So yeah, having to take devices off for shearing, how often they need to be checked, all of those things that might come into play if it's in a collar form. Yeah, extra jobs to do.
Thanks everyone for your responses.
Yeah, so the next thing we're going to do within the group is another poll. So I'm going to pose a scenario to you all. So earlier in our groups, we talked about all the things that the device would need to have for you to adopt it, what you'd need it to do, what you'd use it for on your farms. So just imagine that perfect U-Butte device that you have designed is available, ready for you to buy. The regs have changed, so there's none of that in the way of you adopting now. Pretend it's not a terrible season like we're in at the moment. Pretend that it's a pretty good season, not great, but just good. For this scenario, we'll say that you only need to tag 75% of your mob, and that the device lifetime is 5 years. So each device will last for 5 years. And just pretend you're trying to tag a mob of 500 sheep, so 75% of a mob of 500. So we're going to pop another poll up, and that poll is how much would you be willing to pay for this perfect well device that you've developed? So this is in dollars per head per year. So those options will be popping up in front of you now if everyone can vote.
Thanks, everyone. So the majority of respondents, so 78%, said that they would be willing to pay less than $50 per head per year for the device, and 22% they're saying $50 to $99 per device.
Yeah, great.
Per head per year. Thank you.
Thanks, Jodie. So I thought off the back of that, I would just run through what some of the existing cattle technology is costing. So the first one being the eShepherd device, those are an outright purchase of $350 per collar, plus a subscription fee of $2 per collar per month. And these devices, if they run off of a tower, there are two options. There's a tower or there's a cellular option. If you require a tower, they are around about $6,500 each installed. Most people only need one, but sometimes you need 2 or 3. The next is the Vents collar. That is a lease basis. So they are $55 per collar per year for a 3-year lease. And they have towers that power their devices, and they are about $15,000 installed. The other available device is the halter device, which is mostly used in dairies. They're now starting to move into beef. These are another lease basis. They are $10 per month per collar, plus they run off of towers also that are around about $10,000 installed each. So yeah, that just gives you an idea of, in the early commercialisation phase that cattle are in now, this is sort of the rough cost of adopting that technology.
Megan had a couple of questions. If you just want to pop back to that previous slide. What percentage of the herd do you need to collar with the cattle?
Yeah, in cattle, the suppliers recommend that 100% of animals are collared. That is because obviously there's still a herd dynamic within cattle, but it's very different to in sheep. So they're more individual. So it's recommended that 100% of the animals are collared. Some of the suppliers will kind of have a bit of leeway there and go down to sort of 80% of the mob or the herd collared. And that's usually in scenarios where, you know, if there's bulls out with cows or something like that, and the bulls aren't collared, or yeah, those sorts of scenarios, or if there's, you know, really large mobs on a pastoral property or something like that.
Thank you. Next one that also relates to this slide is, what radius do the towers cover?
Yeah, most of the towers cover about 10 kilometres around the tower. That is dependent on the topography on the property though. So if there's trees or hills or things like that that get in the way, they will block signal to an extent. But if you've got sort of hills or nice open country, they tend to go out to that 10-kilometre radius.
Thank you. And a perfect segue from those questions is there a cost for the software that supports the collars?
Yeah. So with the eShepherd device, like I said before, that's a $2 per head per month subscription. For halter and vents, their subscription fee is included in their lease cost there. So yeah, there's no additional, at the moment, there's no additional subscription costs for those.
Following on from that, how long does it take to train animals, so from both a sheep and cattle perspective?
Yeah, so there is no commercial standard for sheep yet in Australia, but for cattle, it's sort of a 7 to 10 day training period that just starts them off in a smaller area with a really simple virtual fence to kind of get them interacting with it and get them learning what it means. But most cattle learn within sort of the first day, and the research shows that, yeah, in sheep and cattle, it takes about 3 to 5 interactions with a virtual fence before that association is made. So, and that's under perfect conditions as well. So, like, obviously there are things that might impact that for individual animals, but that's just a guideline.
Thank you. The question about the trials that you've undertaken. So what scale have your trials been held on? How many hectares were in the inclusion and exclusion zones?
Yeah. So we've done a range of trials, sort of ranging from intensive replicated trials at Struan, our research farm down at Narracourt, and sort of large scale trials across a large paddock on a station. So we've, gone with sheep in 2 hectare paddocks in mobs of 19, where we've excluded them from a third of their paddock, all the way up to 44,500 hectare paddock with 100 heifers in it, and kind of managing their location around that paddock. So everywhere in between. Over at Minnipa, we had that stubble paddock that we excluded sheep off of that sandhill. That was about 50 hectares, and we had 50 ewes in there. So yeah, a range of scenarios that we've assessed the technology in.
Thank you. The sheep collars are not available, but are there any companies interested in commercially producing them for Australia?
I think at the moment there's a bit of a gap between the demand and the suppliers being willing to invest in the sheep space. There has been a little bit of work going on by independent research institutions, as well as sort of startups investigating it, but yeah, generally at the moment, the suppliers seem to be really interested in growing their their cattle device and getting that kind of commercially available out there, because there's legislation that allows that for cattle, so that's kind of where they're focusing. So hopefully in the near future, that demand for sheep can be captured and we get some more action in that space.
Thank you. And the last question is, what can farmers and industry do to support the commercialisation of virtual fencing?
Yeah, absolutely. So if producers are really, really keen, or industry people are really keen on the idea of this tech, and they want to see it go forward, really engaging with your local farming groups and Livestock SA, people, institutions like that are there to advocate for you as a producer, getting them involved, writing letters, really highlighting that the demand is there and what the potential uses might be would all be really, really useful. All of that going through your local farming groups and advocacy groups like Livestock SA is the best way to go.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's webinar. Megan, thank you for sharing your insight and expertise. If anyone has any additional questions, you can contact me directly. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.